Millionaire sees poor girl feeding his wheelchair-bound son and changes her life. In the central square of Oak Ridge Springs, a small town in rural Pennsylvania, passers-by turned their attention to an unusual scene. A girl of about 9, dressed in simple, worn-out clothes, was offering pieces of a banana to a well-dressed baby in an adapted wheelchair that likely cost more than everything she owned. William Montgomery watched from a distance, his heart tightening. His son Ethan, just 2 years old and diagnosed with cerebral palsy at birth, was smiling brightly at the unfamiliar girl. A smile that he, a millionaire father and owner of the largest textile company in the region, rarely managed to draw from his little boy. The nanny, who was supposed to be watching Ethan, had stepped away to take a call. And in those few minutes, the unknown girl had accomplished what entire teams of expensive therapists had failed to do: bring genuine joy to his son's eyes. "He really likes bananas, huh?" the girl asked, smiling as little Ethan laughed, reaching for another piece of the fruit. Her dark hair was partly pinned back with a small clip, and her eyes sparkled with delight at the baby's reaction. She wore a plain light t-shirt and faded denim shorts that had been rolled up at the hem several times, a sign they'd likely been handed down from someone older. Her worn-out sandals completed the look, revealing her humble circumstances. "Are you all alone here, little one?" she asked the baby, glancing around worriedly. "They shouldn't leave you like this, especially with your little leg problem." William took a few hesitant steps toward the pair. His imposing figure, nearly 6'3" and dressed in an impeccable suit, made the girl's eyes widen as she instinctively backed away. "Sorry, mister, I was just giving him some banana because he looked hungry," she quickly explained, unaware she was speaking to the child's father. "I looked around and didn't see anyone near him. I was gonna call for help, I swear." William felt a lump form in his throat. This barefoot girl, likely one of the many children from poor families on the outskirts of town, showed more care for his son than the professional nanny he paid an exorbitant salary. "You didn't do anything wrong," he replied, trying to soften his naturally stern expression. "In fact, you did something very kind." The nanny returned at that moment, completely alarmed to see her employer there. "Mr. Montgomery, I only stepped away for a second to take an urgent call from my daughter, and—" "We'll discuss this later, Mrs. Jenkins," he interrupted coldly, making it clear the conversation wouldn't be pleasant. The girl, sensing the tension, took another step back. "What's your name?" William asked, turning to her. "Sophie, sir. Sophie Miller," she answered timidly. "Where do you live, Sophie?" "On Meadow Lane, near the abandoned shoe factory." William knew that area well. It was one of the poorest neighborhoods in town, home to families who survived on odd jobs, often supported only by grandparents or single mothers. "And your parents?" Sophie's face darkened. "I live with my Grandma Ruth. My mum left when I was little, never knew my dad." Just then, little Ethan began to whimper, reaching his arms toward the girl. Instinctively, she stepped closer again and offered another piece of banana, which the boy eagerly accepted, smiling once. "More." "Amazing," William murmured, watching the scene. "He usually won't take food from strangers." Sophie shrugged. "Kids like me. On my street, I always look after the neighbors' kids when their mums have to work. I think they feel they can trust him." William Montgomery was known in town as a cold and calculating man, ever since his wife, Catherine, left him after Ethan's diagnosis. Claiming she didn't have the emotional strength to raise a child with special needs, he had closed himself off even more. He focused on accumulating wealth and providing every possible treatment for his son, but he rarely showed affection or emotion. At that moment, however, something shifted inside him. "Sophie, where does your grandmother work?" "She sells homemade sweets in front of the central church, but it's getting harder because she has leg problems and can't stand for too long. I help after school, but it's not always enough." William took a business card from his pocket and handed it to the girl. "Tell your grandmother to come to this address tomorrow at 9 in the morning. I have a proposal for you both." Sophie looked confused at the luxurious card with gold lettering. "What kind of proposal, sir?" William glanced at his son, who still had his eyes fixed on the girl, with a happier expression than he'd seen in months. "One that could change your lives, and maybe ours too." The next morning, Grandma Ruth, a 70-year-old woman with completely white hair, dressed in a simple but clean and well-pressed dress, walked slowly with her cane, accompanied by her granddaughter, toward the imposing gate of the Montgomery mansion in the wealthiest part of town. "I must have gotten the address wrong, Sophie," the old woman said, staring nervously at the building that looked more like a palace. "What would a rich man want with us?" Sophie squeezed her grandmother's hand. "This is exactly where he told us to come, Grandma. The man from yesterday, the father of the little boy in the wheelchair. When they rang the intercom, an impersonal voice answered and soon opened the gate." On the stone path to the main house, Sophie marveled at the enormous garden, decorative fountains, and a pool that seemed bigger than the entire square in her neighborhood. Mrs. Jenkins, the same nanny from the day before, greeted them at the door with a neutral expression. "Mr. Montgomery is waiting for you in his office. Follow me, please." The inside of the house was even more impressive, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork Sophie had only seen in schoolbooks. She held her grandmother's hand tightly, feeling completely out of place. William Montgomery stood waiting, behind a dark wooden desk. Beside him in an adapted chair was little Ethan, who immediately smiled when he saw Sophie. "Good morning, ladies," William greeted them formally. "Thank you for coming." "You're the one who called us here," Grandma Ruth replied with a dignity that impressed the businessman. "We're here to find out what you want." William gestured to the chairs in front of the desk. "Please sit. I have a job proposal. For your granddaughter, Mrs. Miller." Grandma Ruth adjusted herself uncomfortably in the plush chair. "My granddaughter is only 9 years old, sir. She studies in the morning and helps me in the afternoon. She can't work formally." "I'm aware of that," he answered. "I'm not proposing anything illegal. What happened is that yesterday I witnessed something extraordinary." He looked at his son, who was still staring at Sophie. "Ethan has had cerebral palsy since birth. I've spent a fortune on specialists, equipment, and treatments, but we've made little progress. He rarely shows interest in new people or different activities. Yet yesterday, with your granddaughter—" William paused, trying to steady the emotion in his voice. He smiled, truly smiled in a way he hasn't for months. Sophie smiled shyly, looking at little Ethan. "He's a really sweet boy." Grandma Ruth, more suspicious, asked, "And what exactly are you proposing?" "I'd like to hire Sophie to spend a few hours each week here playing with Ethan. It would be after her school hours 3 times a week for 2 hours. I'll pay very well and arrange safe transportation for both ways." The offer was tempting, but Grandma Ruth hesitated. "And why would you choose a poor girl with no experience when you could hire trained professionals?" William looked directly into her eyes. "Because your granddaughter achieved in 5 minutes what teams of therapists couldn't in months. She made my son happy." Before Grandma Ruth could respond, the housekeeper hurried into the office. Mr. Montgomery, the bank representative, called. "The meeting about Mrs. Miller's foreclosure has been moved up to this afternoon." A heavy silence fell over the room. Grandma Ruth visibly paled. "How do you know about our situation with the bank?" she asked, her voice trembling. William kept his expression neutral. "I'm a businessman, Mrs. Miller. I always do my research before making any proposal. I know you're about to lose your home because of a loan taken out to pay for your late husband's medical treatment." Grandma Ruth stood up, pulling her granddaughter by the hand. "We don't need charity, sir. We'll find another way." "I'm not offering charity," William replied, also standing. "I'm offering a well-paid job for your granddaughter, and if you accept, I can settle the bank situation as an advance payment." Sophie, who had been silently observing, spoke up. "Grandma, please, let's accept. I like Ethan, and it would be nice to help him." Grandma Ruth looked at her granddaughter, then at the boy in the adaptive chair, who was still smiling at Sophie. Finally, she faced the businessman. 3 afternoons a week, never past 6 in the evening. And Sophie only comes if her school grades stay good." William extended his hand. "We have an agreement, Mrs. Miller." And so began a relationship that would forever change the lives of everyone involved in ways none of them could have imagined. In the following weeks, Sophie's presence brought new energy to the Montgomery mansion. At first, Mrs. Jenkins, the nanny, and Mrs. Margaret, the housekeeper who had worked there for over 20 years, eyed the simple girl from the poor neighborhood with suspicion. Yet the effect she had on little Ethan was undeniable. During therapy sessions, the boy often cried and refused to participate in exercises. With Sophie, however, he laughed, tried to communicate, and showed remarkable progress in motor coordination. "How do you get him to cooperate like that?" the speech therapist asked one afternoon. After watching Ethan repeat sounds Sophie taught him through a simple game with improvised sock puppets. Sophie shrugged. "I guess it's because I don't treat him like he's sick. On my street, Mrs. Thompson's son has a similar condition. Nobody treats him differently, so he does everything, even plays soccer sitting on the ground with us." These seemingly simple words were included in the therapist's weekly report to William. The businessman, who had always kept an emotional distance from his son's treatment, delegating to professionals, found himself challenged by a child's innocent observation. At the end of the third week, as Sophie prepared to leave after another afternoon with Ethan, William called her into his office. "How are things at school, Sophie?" The girl, still intimidated by the imposing figure of the businessman, answered shyly, "Fine, sir. I got a good grade on my math test this week." William nodded, satisfied. "And your grandmother? Has the bank situation been resolved?" "Yes, sir. The man from the bank came to our house with some new papers." Grandma didn't quite understand. "But it seems we won't lose the house after all." Grandma cried tears of joy. A brief smile crossed William's usually stern face. "That's great. And what do you think Ethan needs?" The question took Sophie by surprise. "What do you mean, sir? You've spent 3 weeks with him. What do you think my son needs to get better?" Sophie thought for a moment, biting her lower lip. "He needs more kids his age to play with. And I think he'd like to get out of that room full of expensive toys more often. Sometimes just a backyard with dirt and a few ants to watch is enough fun." William raised his eyebrows. "Ants?" "Yes, sir. Kids like simple things. Ethan spends too much time alone, just with serious, worried adults. That would make any child sad." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. That conversation, though brief, planted a seed in William's mind. The following Sunday, to the surprise of all the household staff, he cancelled all his meetings and appointments and declared he'd spend the day with his son. Margaret, the housekeeper, nearly dropped the coffee tray when she heard the announcement. "Are you sure, sir? Mr. Montgomery has never cancelled work commitments before." "I'm sure, Margaret. Pack a simple snack in a basket. I'm taking Ethan to the city park." The news spread quickly among the staff. William Montgomery, the workaholic businessman who had practically lived at the office since his wife left, was going to spend an entire Sunday with his son in public. The outing was eye-opening for William. For the first time he faced curious glances, some pitying, others simply respectful, as he walked with his son in the wheelchair along the park paths. To his surprise, many people approached them naturally, some offering help, others simply treating Ethan like any other child. An elderly woman feeding the birds came over and offered Ethan some seeds to toss. "What a beautiful boy," she remarked, smiling. "He has his father's eyes." William, unused to spontaneous interactions, thanked her awkwardly. Ethan, however, was radiant, watching the birds flutter down to eat the seeds he scattered with his father's help. Back at the mansion, William made a decision. On Monday, he called a meeting with Ethan's entire medical team. "I want changes in my son's treatment," he announced, to everyone's surprise. "From today on, I want more outdoor activities, more interaction with other children, less isolation." Dr. Thompson, the neurologist who had treated Ethan since birth, looked skeptical. "Mr. Montgomery, I understand your concern, but Ethan has specific needs that—" "Ethan is a child before he's a patient, doctor," William interrupted firmly, "and I've failed to see that until now." The new approach to Ethan's treatment, inspired by Sophie's simple observations, began to show impressive results. In just a month, the boy showed more enthusiasm for his exercises, responded better to therapy, and, most importantly, smiled often. Sophie continued visiting the mansion 3 times a week, but now her role had expanded. Instead of just playing with Ethan, she actively participated in sessions with the specialists, demonstrating simple techniques she'd developed intuitively, techniques that, to the professional's surprise, worked remarkably well. "Where did you learn that?" the occupational therapist asked after watching Sophie teach Ethan how to hold an adapted spoon, using a method even she didn't know. "I made it up," Sophie replied simply. "Where I come from, you have to be creative. We don't have money to buy expensive toys, so we make our own." The relationship between William and Sophie was also gradually evolving. The businessman, once distant and formal, now occasionally joined in their games and listened carefully to the girl's suggestions. She, in turn, was slowly losing her fear of the imposing figure he represented. One day, after a particularly productive afternoon, when Ethan managed to sit unsupported for almost 5 minutes, William asked Sophie to wait before leaving. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to a room she had never seen before. It was a spacious area with light walls and a large table in the center, covered in architectural blueprints and models. "What is all this, sir?" Sophie asked curiously. William pointed to the largest model. "This is the project for the new children's rehabilitation center I'm building in the central neighborhood. It will have state-of-the-art equipment, but also green spaces and areas for play, just like you suggested." Sophie stared in awe at the miniature building with its gardens, accessible ramps, and adapted play areas. "And there's more," William continued. "I want your help with the details. What would a child like Ethan want in a place like this?" Sophie's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I can really give ideas?" "Of course. In fact, I want you to be my official consultant for this project." The girl was speechless for a moment, then eagerly began listing. "There should be a special sandbox where wheelchairs can roll in, and a little garden where kids can plant things, and maybe a mini farm with small animals they can pet." William smiled, genuinely charmed by Sophie's enthusiasm. Just then his secretary knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Montgomery, Mrs. Catherine just arrived. She's waiting in the foyer." William's smile vanished instantly, replaced first by shock, then by restrained anger. "Catherine? My ex-wife?" "Yes, sir. She says she needs to speak with you urgently." Sophie noticed the drastic change in William's expression and instinctively stepped back. "May I go now, sir? My grandmother must be waiting for me." "Of course, Sophie," he replied distractedly. "Margaret will take you home." As Sophie was escorted out through the back by the housekeeper, William headed to the main hall where Catherine Montgomery, or rather Catherine Barnes, as she had reclaimed her maiden name, was waiting. At 35, Catherine was still stunning. Tall, elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer dress that flattered her impeccable figure, she looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. "William," she greeted with a rehearsed smile. "It's been a while." 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days, he replied coldly, "since you walked out that door saying you couldn't bear the burden of a flawed child." Catherine had the decency to look embarrassed. "I made a mistake, William. I panicked. I was weak. But I've grown. I've changed. And I miss my son." William crossed his arms, studying his ex-wife with a piercing gaze. "What really brings you here, Catherine? I don't believe you've suddenly developed maternal instincts." The beautiful woman sighed, walking around the hall as if the house still belonged to her. "I heard about the new rehabilitation center you're building. It's in all the papers. The millionaire inspired by his son to invest millions in innovative treatments for special children." She paused, turning to face him. "I also heard about the poor girl who miraculously helped Ethan improve. The papers call her his guardian angel. I was curious to meet this person." The way Catherine pronounced the word person made her disdain clear. William felt his blood boil. Sophie is an extraordinary child who saw Ethan as a complete human being, not as a problem to be fixed or a burden to be carried. Catherine raised one perfectly arched eyebrow. "I didn't come here to argue. I came because I want a second chance, William. With you and with our son." Margaret, who had just returned after taking Sophie to the car, stopped abruptly upon hearing those words. She knew Catherine too well to believe in this sudden transformation. "The driver has already taken the girl, sir," she informed, looking coldly at her former employer. "Shall I serve something for the visitor?" "That won't be necessary, Margaret. Mrs. Barnes is already leaving." Catherine didn't move. "I'm not leaving until you agree to let me see Ethan. I have rights. I'm his mother." "Rights?" William's voice rose dangerously. "You gave up any rights the moment you abandoned a 6-month-old child because he wasn't perfect enough for your happy family photo album." "I was sick, William." Catherine raised her voice, her eyes glistening with tears he couldn't tell were genuine. "I had postpartum depression. I wasn't thinking straight. And what about the 3 years after? Were you also sick when you refused to answer my calls, when you ignored his birthdays, when you moved to Paris without leaving a contact address?" The tension between them was palpable. Margaret, sensing the argument might escalate, gently intervened. "Mr. Montgomery, little Ethan is awake and asking for you." The words had the desired effect. William immediately shifted his posture, as if remembering something more important than his anger. "Tell him I'll be there in a minute, Margaret." Turning back to Catherine, he stated firmly, "This conversation is over. If you want to discuss supervised visits with the son you abandoned, talk to my lawyers." "You can't keep me from seeing my own child," she protested. "Actually, I can. I have full custody, granted by the court precisely because you disappeared. Now, if you'll excuse me, my son is waiting." As he walked away, William still heard Catherine declare, "This isn't over, William. I'll be back, and with my own lawyers." Catherine's unexpected visit left William deeply unsettled. In the 3 years since the abandonment, he had channeled all his pain into work and caring for Ethan. Now her mere presence reopened wounds he thought had healed. The next morning, still shaken, William called Dr. Wilson, his trusted lawyer. "She doesn't stand a chance of getting custody, does she?" he asked after recounting the encounter. "Legally, her position is weak," the lawyer replied, "but never underestimate the power of a remorseful mother before a sentimental judge. We need to be prepared." The news of a potential legal battle coincided with a worrying turn in Grandma Ruth's health. Sophie's grandmother, who already suffered from hypertension and diabetes, was found unconscious by her granddaughter when she returned from school. When Sophie didn't show up at the mansion that afternoon, William grew immediately concerned. The girl had never missed a day without notice. His calls to her contact number went unanswered. Driven by a feeling he didn't fully understand, William decided to go personally to Meadow Lane. It was his first time visiting that part of town. The narrow streets barely accommodated his luxury car, which drew curious and sometimes hostile glances. The modest houses, many without plaster or paint, stood in stark contrast to his world of marble and crystal. After asking a few locals, he finally found the small Miller home. It was a simple structure, yet remarkably clean and well kept within its limitations. A small garden of well-tended flowers framed the modest entrance. William knocked on the door, feeling strangely nervous. He was greeted by a neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who was watching over Sophie while her grandmother was in the hospital. "You must be her employer," the woman said, eyeing the well-dressed man before her with curiosity. "Please come in." The tiny living room was impeccably tidy. On one wall, William noticed several colorful drawings, all depicting the same subject, his son Ethan. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, trying to do her homework, but her red-rimmed eyes showed she had been crying. "Mr. Montgomery," she exclaimed, jumping up. "I'm so sorry I didn't come today, but Grandma got sick and—" William raised a hand, gently stopping her. "That's all right, Sophie. I was worried when you didn't show up, so I came to check on you. How is your grandmother?" "She's at the hospital. The doctor said it was a mild stroke. She'll need to stay for a few days." Sophie's voice trembled slightly as she delivered the news. William felt a wave of compassion he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Which hospital?" "Mercy General. But I couldn't stay there. They don't allow children." William nodded thoughtfully. "Sophie, pack your things. You'll stay at my house while your grandmother is in the hospital." Both Sophie and Mrs. Thompson looked at him in shock. "At your house, sir?" the neighbor asked, clearly surprised. "Yes, I can't leave a 9-year-old alone, and I know everyone in the neighborhood has their own responsibilities. Besides, Ethan misses her." Sophie's worried expression softened slightly. Can I bring my school books and visit Grandma at the hospital every day? Of course, and don't worry about your grandmother. I'll make sure she gets the best possible care. For the 10 days Grandma Ruth remained hospitalized, Sophie stayed at the Montgomery mansion. At first, the situation caused discomfort among the staff, who weren't sure how to treat the girl, as a guest or as an employee. It was Margaret, the housekeeper, who set the rules. The girl is Mr. Montgomery's guest and should be treated as such, she declared firmly. And more importantly, she's little Ethan's friend. That makes her special in this house. For Sophie, the experience was bittersweet. Though worried about her grandmother, she marveled at the mansion's comforts, a room all to herself bigger than her entire home, delicious meals prepared by a private chef, and the chance to be with Ethan every day. The constant closeness with the boy accelerated his progress even further. Under William's watchful eye, Ethan began babbling more sounds, controlling his movements better and showing greater awareness of the world around him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing, one evening as Sophie was getting ready for bed, William gently knocked on her door. "May I come in for a moment?" The girl, dressed in new pajamas Margaret had bought for her, nodded shyly. "I have good news," William announced, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Your grandmother is being discharged tomorrow. The test showed no serious after effects, but she'll need special care for a while." Sophie's face lit up. "That's wonderful, so I can go home then?" William hesitated. "Sophie, your grandmother will need complete rest for the next few weeks. I spoke with her today, and we agreed it would be best if you stayed here a little longer. I would hire a nurse to stay with her during the day, but what about school and our things? I've already arranged everything with your school principal. My driver will take you every day. As for your things, you can gather what you need when we pick up your grandmother tomorrow." Sophie lowered her eyes, thoughtful. "I like staying here, sir. Ethan feels like a little brother to me now. But I'm afraid Grandma will be sad alone." William smiled, touched by the girl's concern. "Your grandmother can visit us whenever she feels well enough, and on weekends you can stay with her if you prefer." The next morning, when they went to pick up Grandma Ruth from the hospital, Sophie could hardly contain her joy at seeing her. Though thinner and weary, the elderly woman maintained the determined gaze and dignified posture that defined her. "Are you sure about this arrangement?" she asked William as she settled into the luxurious car. "I don't want my granddaughter to become a servant in your home." "Don't worry, Mrs. Miller," he replied sincerely. "Sophie is a special guest. Her effect on my son is indescribable. Ethan smiles more, tries to speak, shows interest in the world. She's awakened something in him that no expensive treatment could." The old woman studied the businessman for a moment, as if weighing his sincerity. "You've changed since the first time we met. You're less cold." William couldn't help but smile at her frankness. "Perhaps I'm learning some important lessons thanks to your granddaughter." The new routine quickly fell into place. Grandma Ruth settled comfortably into her home, now equipped with new amenities for her recovery, and visited daily by a private nurse. Sophie divided her time between school, the Montgomery mansion, and weekend visits to her grandmother. Ethan flourished under Sophie's constant presence. The specialists couldn't hide their surprise at the boy's progress. He had begun to babble recognizable words and showed significant improvement in motor coordination. "It's almost miraculous," Dr. Thompson remarked during a checkup. "In 30 years of pediatric neurology, I've rarely seen such rapid progress in similar cases." William, who now personally attended every appointment, simply replied, "It's not a miracle, doctor. It's the power of genuine human connection." The peace of this new arrangement, however, was disrupted by an unexpected event. One Thursday afternoon, as Sophie played with Ethan in the garden under the nanny's supervision, an elegant car parked in front of the mansion. Catherine had returned, this time accompanied by a middle-aged man who introduced himself as her lawyer. "I've come to see my son," she announced, ignoring the security guard's protests. William, alerted by the staff, quickly stepped out to intercept her before she reached the garden. You don't have permission to be here, Catherine. I have every right to see my son, she countered, gesturing to the lawyer. Dr. Richardson here will confirm that even without custody, I have visitation rights. The man cleared his throat, adopting a professional tone. Mr. Montgomery, my client is willing to resolve this amicably, but if necessary, we will take legal action. William was about to respond when Sophie's voice called from the garden. Mr. Montgomery, come see. Ethan held the ball all by himself. Catherine immediately turned toward the child's voice, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the girl in the garden, standing near a small boy in an adapted wheelchair. That's her, isn't it? The miracle. Worker everyone's talking about. Her mocking tone made her opinion clear. William felt a surge of protectiveness toward Sophie. My lawyer will contact yours to discuss supervised visits. Now, please leave my property. But Catherine was already walking determinedly toward the garden, ignoring William's protests. As she approached, Sophie looked at her curiously, unsure who this elegant woman was. Ethan, upon seeing the mother he didn't recognize, showed no special reaction, keeping his attention on the colorful ball he held. Hi, my little angel, said Catherine, kneeling near the wheelchair, her voice suddenly sugary. Mommy's here. Sophie watched the scene, confused, until William quickly stepped forward. Sophie, take Ethan inside, please. No, protested Catherine, standing up. I have the right to be with my son. You lost that right 3 years ago, William replied coldly. What followed was painful. As the adults argued, Ethan began to cry, frightened by the raised voices. Sophie instinctively positioned herself between the wheelchair and the adults, as if trying to protect the boy. You're scaring him, she said with a courage that surprised everyone. Please stop shouting. Catherine glared at the girl with barely contained anger. And who are you to tell me how to treat my own son? Some nobody who happened to win his favor? Enough, Catherine, William interjected sharply. Sophie, however, didn't back down. Looking straight into the woman's eyes, she replied, I'm Ethan's friend. And friends protect each other when they're scared. Something in the simplicity and firmness of those words seemed to unsettle Catherine. She took a step back, glancing between the determined girl and her still crying son. This isn't over, William, she declared finally, turning to leave. My lawyers will be in touch. After Catherine left, William found Sophie in Ethan's room softly singing to the now calm boy. Thank you, he said simply. Sophie looked up. Was that woman Ethan's mother? William nodded gravely. Yes, she left us when he was just 6 months old, right after his cerebral palsy diagnosis. She seemed sad, Sophie remarked thoughtfully. Not a good kind of sad, but the kind that makes people angry. The observation, coming from a 9-year-old, surprised William. How do you know so much about people, Sophie? The girl shrugged. On the street where I live, there are lots of sad people. I learned to tell the difference between those who are sad because life is hard and those who are sad because they chose to be that way. William sat beside her, watching his now peacefully sleeping son. And what's the difference? The first, kind can still be kind even when they're sad. The others only think about themselves. Catherine's visit and the threat of a custody battle hung like a dark cloud over the Montgomery mansion. William began spending long hours in meetings with his lawyers, preparing for the worst. Sophie noticed the change in the atmosphere. The businessman, who had finally started opening up and showing more affection for his son, became distant and worried again. One afternoon, while Ethan was in his physical therapy session, Sophie found William alone in his office, surrounded by papers. Mr. Montgomery, she called hesitantly, can I ask you something? He looked up, seeming exhausted. Of course, Sophie. Is the pretty lady going to take Ethan away? The direct question, filled with genuine concern, touched William deeply. I'm doing everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. Sophie bit her lip, thoughtful. You know, when my mom left, Grandma Ruth told me that sometimes people don't know how to love the right way. It's not that they don't love, they just don't know how to show it. William looked at the girl with curiosity. Your grandmother is a wise woman. She also said forgiving is good, not just for the person being forgiven, but especially for the one who forgives. Sophie continued. It took me a while to understand that. And did you forgive your mother for leaving? Sophie nodded slowly. Yes. Not because she deserves it, but because I became happier after I stopped being angry with her. Sophie's simple words sparked deep reflection in William. He had never considered forgiving Catherine, not after what she had done to Ethan, to him, to the family they should have been. In the weeks that followed, a series of meetings took place between William's and Catherine's lawyers. To everyone's surprise, including his own legal team, William proposed an agreement. I'm willing to allow supervised visits, gradually increasing as Ethan adjusts to her presence, he explained to Dr. Wilson. But with one non-negotiable condition: Catherine must commit to family therapy and receive professional guidance on how to handle Ethan's condition. The lawyer looked at him in astonishment. That's an unexpectedly conciliatory stance. William, what made you change your mind? William smiled faintly. Let's just say I received some wise advice from an unexpected source. The agreement was presented to Catherine, who at first reacted with suspicion. After lengthy negotiations, she finally accepted the terms, though reluctantly agreeing to the therapy requirement. The first supervised visit was tense. Ethan didn't recognize his mother and seemed uncomfortable with her intrusive presence. Catherine, in turn, didn't know how to interact with a son who didn't match the idealized image she had of a child. Maybe you should try playing with him the way Sophie does, William suggested, watching his ex-wife's awkward attempts. I don't need lessons from some street kid on how to care for my son, Catherine snapped. That street kid, as you call her, made more progress with Ethan in 3 months than entire teams of specialists did in 3 years. The remark silenced Catherine momentarily. Reluctantly, she began to mimic some of the approaches she'd seen Sophie use with Ethan, speaking directly to him, not about him, offering simple choices, respecting his pace. To her own surprise, by the end of the visit, Ethan allowed her to help feed him, a small but meaningful step forward. He seems more aware than I imagined, she remarked as she prepared to leave. Ethan has always been aware, William replied. We just weren't always there for him. The visits continued in the following weeks, each one slightly less tense than the last. Meanwhile, William's Children's Rehabilitation Center neared completion. Incorporating many of Sophie's suggestions, she had become something of an honorary consultant for the project. The grand opening of the center was scheduled for Sophie's 10th birthday. A coincidence William turned into a double celebration. The event drew officials, the press, and, of course, the families of the children who would benefit from the new facility. Sophie, dressed in a new outfit specially chosen by Margaret, was overwhelmed with emotion when she saw her name on the dedication plaque, Ethan and Sophie Children's Rehabilitation Center. Why is my name up there too? She asked William, astonished. Because without you, this place wouldn't exist, he replied simply. You taught me to see my son beyond his condition, and that's what we want to do for every child who comes here. The opening ceremony was widely covered by local and national media. The story of the poor girl who had transformed the millionaire's life, and his son's, spread quickly, stirring admiration and emotion. Catherine, who attended the event discreetly, watched everything with an unreadable expression. As the ceremony ended, she approached Sophie, who was playing with Ethan and other children in one of the new adapted spaces. Can I talk to you for a minute? She asked, surprising the girl. Sophie nodded cautiously. Her previous interactions with William's ex-wife hadn't been particularly friendly. I wanted... Catherine hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. I wanted to thank you for taking such good care of my son when I couldn't. Sophie looked at her with her sharp eyes. You can still take care of him. He needs all of us. Catherine swallowed hard, clearly moved by the maturity of the bee response. I'm trying, Sophie. It's not easy, but I'm trying. Nothing worth having comes easy, Sophie replied, repeating one of her grandmother's favorite sayings. But it gets easier when you don't give up. The conversation was interrupted by William, who approached with Grandma Ruth, now fully recovered from her health issue. It's time for the birthday cake, he announced, smiling at Sophie. The birthday girl should do the honors. The moment of singing Happy Birthday was particularly emotional, surrounded by her grandmother William, Ethan in his adapted wheelchair, and dozens of children who would benefit from the new centre. Sophie felt truly happy. Even Catherine seemed to have softened her stance, clapping genuinely as the girl blew out the candles. At the end of the day, back at home, William invited Sophie and Grandma Ruth into his office for a talk. "I have something important to discuss with you," he began, seeming slightly nervous, a rare sight for the usually composed businessman. "Is something wrong, sir?" asked Grandma Ruth, concerned. William smiled to reassure her. "Nothing wrong. In fact, it's a proposal I've been thinking about for a while." He picked up a folder on the desk and opened it, revealing official documents. "These are papers to establish an educational foundation that will fully cover Sophie's schooling, from elementary school through college, in any field she chooses." Grandma Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, it's not charity, Mrs. Miller," William clarified quickly. "It's an investment in the future. Sophie has a natural gift for helping people, especially children with special needs. It would be a waste not to nurture that gift." Sophie looked at the documents, slowly grasping what they meant. "Could I be a doctor or a therapist?" she asked, her voice brimming with excitement. "Anything you want, Sophie. You have the potential to be exceptional in whatever career you choose." The girl suddenly grew serious. "But what about Ethan? If I study a lot, I won't be able to spend as much time with him." William smiled, touched by her concern. "Ethan will always be part of your life, Sophie, and you'll always be part of his. But you also need to build your own future. There's one more thing," he continued, picking up another envelope. "This is a purchase agreement for the house next to yours, Mrs. Miller. I plan to renovate it completely to make it accessible and adapted for Ethan's regular visits. If you'll allow it, of course." Grandma Ruth looked at the businessman in astonishment. "You want to bring my grandson to our neighborhood?" "I want Ethan to experience a normal life outside the mansion's walls," your granddaughter taught me that isolating him for protection was actually limiting him. He needs more exposure to the real world. With proper supervision, of course. The idea was revolutionary. Just a few months ago, William barely let his son leave the house, fearful of stares, comments, and prejudice. Now he was proposing to bring Ethan regularly to a modest neighborhood, to interact with other children, to experience a normality he'd never had. "The house would be adapted with all the necessary equipment for Ethan," he explained, "and it would be a second home for us, not just occasional visits." "You would live in our neighborhood?" asked Grandma Ruth, incredulous. "Not full-time, obviously, but I'd spend weekends there and some weeknights. It would be good for Ethan, and for me, too." Sophie, who had been listening intently, couldn't contain her joy. "That would be the best thing ever. Ethan could meet all the kids on the street, and I could show him the little field where we play, and old Joe's bakery that makes the best sweetbread." William smiled, watching the girl's excitement. In just a few months, she had completely transformed his worldview, his relationship with his son, even his own capacity for joy. "So, Mrs. Miller, do we have a deal?" The elderly woman studied the man before her, reflecting on the extraordinary journey they'd shared since that first tense meeting in his office. "Yes, Mr. Montgomery, we have a deal, but on one condition." William raised his eyebrows, curious. "What would that be?" "That you stop calling me Mrs. Miller. My name is Ruth. After everything we've been through, I think it's time we dropped the formalities." William smiled, extending his hand. "Fair enough, Ruth, and please call me William." The transformation in their lives was profound in the months and years that followed. The house next to Grandma Ruth's was completely renovated, becoming a warm and fully accessible space for Ethan's needs. True to his word, William split his time between the mansion and the modest neighborhood home, much to the initial surprise and curiosity of the neighbors. Little Ethan thrived in this new environment. Regular interaction with other children, a less rigid routine, and continued therapy led to remarkable progress. By age 4, he could speak several words clearly and showed a surprising talent for drawing and colors, revealing an artistic gift no one had expected. Sophie, now 11, excelled in her studies. With William's financial support, she enrolled in one of the city's best schools, quickly becoming one of its brightest students. Her dream of becoming an occupational therapist to help children like Ethan grew clearer every day. The relationship between Catherine and Ethan also improved, though more slowly and with greater complexity. Supervised visits continued, gradually increasing in frequency and duration. What she had once seen as an obligation, therapy now brought genuine changes in her perspective and behavior. "I never thought I could handle this," she confided in William after a particularly successful afternoon with Ethan. "I always believed I was too weak." "You're not weak, Catherine," he replied with an understanding that would have been impossible months before. "You just weren't ready. None of us were." Though their relationship never rekindled romantically, the former spouses developed a mutual respect centered on Ethan's well-being. One of the most meaningful moments of this journey came during Sophie's elementary school graduation. Besides receiving honors, she was asked to give a speech as the top student. Standing on stage before an audience that included her grandmother, William, Ethan in his adapted chair, and even Catherine, Sophie spoke with surprising eloquence for her age. "3 years ago, I was just a poor girl helping her grandmother sell sweets in the square. Today, I stand here receiving this diploma, with the chance to dream of a career in medicine or therapy. What changed? I found people who believed in me, and I found within myself the ability to believe in others." Her eyes turned to Ethan, who was enthusiastically clapping in his own way. "I learned that the greatest limitations aren't always physical, but the ones we place in our minds. I learned that true wealth isn't in mansions or luxury cars, but in the ability to see value where others see only problems." William, seated in the front row, couldn't contain his emotion. The contrast between the cold, calculating businessman he had been just 3 years earlier and the man he had become was almost unimaginable. The party after the ceremony was held at the adapted house in the neighborhood. A simple yet warm gathering that brought together neighbors, Sophie's schoolmates, Ethan's medical team, and even some staff from the mansion who had developed genuine affection for the girl. At one point, William asked for everyone's attention for a special announcement. "Today, we're not just celebrating Sophie's graduation, but also some extraordinary news we received this morning," he said, holding an official envelope. "The Ethan and Sophie Children's Rehabilitation Center has been selected as a national model by the Department of Health. The program we developed will be replicated in 5 other cities across the country next year." The applause was enthusiastic. The center, which had started as a personal project, had become a national benchmark for compassionate care for children with special needs, incorporating many of the intuitive approaches Sophie had originally suggested. "None of this would have been possible," William continued, his voice thick with emotion, "without a 9-year-old girl who, on an ordinary afternoon, decided to share her banana with a stranger's baby in a wheelchair." The look he exchanged with Sophie in that moment held more gratitude and affection than any words could express. The seasons passed, and with them, everyone's lives continued to transform. Sophie, now 14, began a special pre-university program focused on biomedical sciences. Ethan, now 7, attended a mainstream school with specialized support, developing impressive artistic skills that compensated for his physical limitations. William, still a successful businessman, had completely reorganized his priorities. His company remained profitable, but he had delegated much of the operational responsibilities to dedicate more time to the unconventional family he had formed and to the rehabilitation center, which had become his true passion. Grandma Ruth, at 75, remained active and healthy. Dividing her time between the small homemade sweets business she still ran more for pleasure than necessity, and her volunteer work at the center, where her stories and wisdom charmed children and parents alike. Even Catherine had found a new purpose. After completing her therapeutic process, she surprised everyone by volunteering to work in the center's fundraising department, using her social connections to secure donations and support. "I never imagined I'd end up working for a cause like this," she confessed to William during a charity event. "But somehow I feel like I'm finally doing something meaningful." On a special afternoon, 5 years after that first meeting in the park, William gathered Sophie, Ethan, Grandma Ruth, and, surprisingly, Catherine for lunch at the neighborhood house. There was a special reason for the gathering, something he had been planning for months. After dessert, William asked for everyone's attention and pulled a small box from his pocket. 5 years ago, a 9-year-old girl completely changed the course of our lives, he began, looking at Sophie, now a poised and confident teenager. She taught me how to be a real father. She taught Ethan how to smile again. He taught Catherine to accept and love our son just as he is. And he showed us all that family isn't defined by blood or roles, but by love and mutual care. He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold necklace with a sun-shaped pendant. This isn't just a belated birthday gift, Sophie. It's a symbol of what you mean to us: light, warmth, new life. And it comes with a question. William looked at Grandma Ruth, who nodded encouragingly, already aware of what was coming. Sophie, your grandmother and I have talked a lot these past few months, and I'd like to know if you'd allow me to become your legal guardian, alongside her. Not to replace your family, but to officially expand it. Sophie stared in shock, first at William, then at her grandmother. You want to adopt me? I want to make official what's already happened naturally, he explained. I want you to legally have all the same rights as Ethan, including my last name, if you wish. Your grandmother would still be your primary guardian, but I'd have legal authority to make decisions about your education, health, and well-being. The teenager fell silent for a moment, processing the offer. Then her eyes filled with tears. You'd be my dad? The simplicity of the question moved William deeply. On paper and in my heart, if you'll have me. Sophie looked at Ethan, who watched the scene with bright, curious eyes. And I'd officially be Ethan's sister? Yes, William confirmed, with a smile. Though in practice you've always been the best sister he could ask for. Sophie's response was to stand and hug William tightly, something that had become natural between them over the years, but now carried special meaning. Yes, she answered, her voice choked. I want to be a Montgomery too. Catherine, who had been silently observing, surprised everyone by speaking up. Sophie, I know we haven't been the closest, but I want you to know I wholeheartedly support this. You've done more for my son than I ever could, and for that I'll always be grateful. The sincere words from William's ex-wife marked the end of a cycle of hurt and resentment and the beginning of a new family dynamic built on mutual respect and love for Ethan. The legal procedures for shared guardianship were completed a few months later. Sophie kept the name Miller in honor of her grandmother, but officially added Montgomery to her name. The courthouse ceremony was simple but emotional, especially when the judge asked Ethan, who had insisted on attending, "And what about you, young man? How do you feel about your new official sister?" Ethan, using the adaptive communication device he'd mastered with impressive skill, answered clearly, "She was always my sister. Now everyone will know." The story of the improvised Montgomery Miller family became a regional inspiration. The rehabilitation center continued to expand, eventually serving children from across the country. Sophie, true to her childhood dream, studied medicine and specialized in pediatric neurology, returning to the center to work alongside the same professionals she once admired. Ethan, surpassing all initial medical expectations, flourished as an extraordinary visual artist, with works inspired by his own life experiences gaining national recognition, many auctioned to benefit disability support organizations. William, when reflecting on the transformation of his life, often quoted a phrase that Sophie had said when she was just a 9-year-old girl offering a banana to an unknown baby. Sometimes, we just need to see people as they truly are, not as we think they should be. This phrase became the official motto of the Ethan and Sophie Children's Rehabilitation Center, a daily reminder that true change begins with a simple act of kindness and the courage to look beyond appearances. 10 years after that chance meeting in the square, during Sophie's graduation celebration from medical school, William gave an emotional speech. Some people spend their whole lives chasing wealth, power, and status. I had all that and discovered they were just empty substitutes for what truly matters. It took a 9-year-old girl in worn-out clothes and with a heart of gold to teach me the real meaning of wealth, the ability to see value where others see only limitations, to give without expecting anything in return, to transform lives with small acts of kindness. Sophie didn't just save my son, she saved all of us. End of story. Dear listener, Has this journey of resilience touched your heart? Share your own story of transformation in the comments and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Your support is our greatest treasure.